The farm sat far away from the nearest town, surrounded by wide stretches of open fields that changed color with every season. In summer, it was golden and heavy with heat. In winter, it turned pale and silent, as if the land itself was holding its breath at dawn. When the sky was still half asleep and the horizon was painted with soft gray light, the place felt almost frozen in time. Inside the old wooden farmhouse, a man was already awake. His name was Daniel Mercer, a widowed farmer. In his late 40s, his hands were rough from years of labor, his face marked with lines that didn't come only from age, but from grief. He moved through the house quietly, as if loud sounds might disturb something fragile that no longer existed. The silence was not new to him, but it never became easier. On the kitchen table sat 2 mugs. One of them was always empty. Daniel would sometimes place a hand near it, not touching, just remembering. It had been years since his wife, Claire, passed away, but the habit remained. She used to wake up earlier than him, humming softly while making coffee. She filled the house with small sounds that made it feel alive. After she was gone, even the walls seemed to forget how to speak. He stepped outside into the cold morning air. The wooden porch creaked under his boots. The barn stood a short distance away, large and weathered, its red paint faded by time and storms. Chickens moved lazily in the yard, and a horse in the corral lifted its head briefly before returning to stillness. Everything followed a rhythm Daniel knew by heart. Feed the animals. Check the fences. Repair what the wind broke last night. Repeat. It wasn't a bad life. Many would say it was peaceful, but peace and loneliness often looked the same, from a distance, and felt very different up close. As he walked toward the barn, Daniel noticed the sky shifting. A storm had been building overnight, and now the clouds were heavier, darker, pressing down like an unspoken warning. Wind moved across the fields, bending grass in waves. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled low and distant. He tightened his jacket and kept working. Hours passed. The rain arrived slowly at first, then all at once, heavy drops hit the roof of the barn like scattered stones. Daniel didn't rush inside. He was used to weather like this. The farm demanded patience, no matter what the sky decided to do. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and wood. It was warm compared to the outside. Storm. Daniel checked the feed, adjusted a gate, and moved through tasks with practiced ease. But even here, in the middle of work, silence followed him. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that reminded him of absence. He paused for a moment, leaning against a wooden post. His eyes drifted toward the open barn door, where rain fell in straight lines, turning the world into a blurred gray painting. That's when he noticed something unusual. At first, it was just a shape near the edge of his property. Hard to see through the rain? He squinted, stepping closer. The figure didn't move like an animal or drift like debris. It was standing still, human, a woman. She was standing at the far edge of the yard, near the fence line, soaked completely by the storm. Her clothes clung to her as the wind pushed against her. She wasn't running. She wasn't calling out. She was just there, as if she had reached the end of something and didn't know what came next. Daniel's first instinct was caution. Strangers rarely came this far out, and those who did usually had a reason that didn't involve kindness. He stayed where he was, watching the woman, hesitated for a long moment, then took a step forward, then another. Slowly, carefully, as if the ground itself might reject her. She crossed into the yard, keeping her head slightly lowered against the rain. Daniel didn't move. She stopped near the porch, close enough now that he could see her, face clearly tired, pale, and carrying something unspoken in her expression. Not fear alone, but exhaustion layered with determination. The wind pushed rain between them like a curtain. She looked up at the farmhouse, then at him. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of rain filled the space. And then, she gathered whatever strength she had left, and said it softly, almost breaking under the weight of the words, "Can I stay in your barn? I'll work for food." The question hung in the air, heavier than the storm around them. Daniel didn't answer immediately. People don't ask for barn shelter unless they have nowhere else left to go. And people who have nowhere left to go usually carry stories they don't speak about on the first meeting. The wind continued to push against the farm, as if the world itself was waiting for his response. The rain didn't ease after her words. If anything, it grew louder, like the sky itself was reacting to the moment unfolding beneath it. Water ran off the roof in steady streams, pooling around the wooden steps of the farmhouse. The storm made everything feel smaller, tighter, as if the world had narrowed down to just 2 people standing a few feet apart. Daniel Mercer stood on the porch, his hand resting lightly on the wooden railing. He didn't step forward, and he didn't step back. Years of living alone had made him careful with decisions that affected more than just himself. A farm didn't forgive poor judgment, and neither did life out here. The woman stood at the edge of the porch, rain soaking through her clothes, hair clinging to her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. That was what struck him most. There was desperation in her situation. Yes, but not performance, not manipulation. Just exhaustion that had reached its limit. He studied her quietly. People came through these parts sometimes, lost travelers, drifters, those trying to outrun something. But very few lasted more than a few minutes standing in this weather without breaking down or turning away. This woman hadn't moved an inch since speaking. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You don't have anywhere else?" The question wasn't cruel. It was practical. Out here, practicality often came before kindness. She hesitated, before answering, as if deciding how much truth to risk. "No," she said. "Not anymore." That was all she offered. The wind pushed harder against the barn behind him, rattling loose wood somewhere in the distance. Daniel glanced briefly toward it, then back at her. His instincts told him to close the door, to return to his routine, to avoid complications. Life had taught him that most unexpected arrivals carried consequences. But something about her presence didn't fit that pattern. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, not from cold alone, but from carrying too much for too long. Still, she held her ground. Even in silence, she wasn't collapsing. Daniel stepped down one stair. The woman didn't flinch. "You can't just stay here," he said carefully. "This isn't a shelter. It's a working farm." "I know," she replied quickly, almost as if she had rehearsed it. "I'll work anything you need. I can help in the barn. I don't need much food. Just somewhere to stay." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she didn't stop speaking. That mattered to Daniel more than anything else so far. People who were lying often avoided detail. CDIDN. Single quotes T. Another flash of lightning lit the sky briefly, illuminating the fields behind her. For a second, she looked even more alone standing between a storm and a man who hadn't yet decided what kind of man he still was. Daniel crossed his arms. The farm had space. That wasn't the issue. The issue was trust. He glanced toward the barn again. Empty stalls. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Feeds stored in barrels. A place meant for animals, not strangers. Letting someone in Evan into the barn meant change. And change, after loss, felt dangerous. "You understand?" he said slowly. "This isn't charity. You work if you stay. No exceptions." Relief flickered across her face, but she kept her composure. "I understand." He studied her for a few more seconds, searching for hesitation, for inconsistency, for anything that felt off. He found none, only exhaustion, only need. Finally, he exhaled. "There's a barn out back," he said. "You can stay there, but you follow the rules. You don't go into the house unless I say so, and you don't take anything that isn't given to you." She nodded immediately. "Yes, thank you." The words were simple, but they carried weight like she had not expected even this small chance. Daniel turned slightly, gesturing toward the barn. "Come on then." She hesitated for just a moment before following as they walked through the rain. The distance between them felt larger than it was. Daniel moved with steady purpose, boots sinking slightly into wet ground. The woman followed a few steps behind, careful not to get too close, not wanting to assume safety where none had been fully offered. The barn loomed ahead. Its red paint faded, wood aged by years of storms like this one. It stood solid, but worn, much like everything else on the property, including the man who owned it. Daniel opened the door. It creaked loudly in the wind. Warm, dry air spilled out, carrying the scent of hay and wood. He stepped aside. "This is it," he said simply. The woman looked inside. For the first time since arriving, something in her expression, soft and not relief, exactly, but the faint recognition of shelter, not safety, not trust, just shelter. She stepped forward slowly and crossed the threshold into a new kind of uncertainty. The barn door closed behind them with a heavy wooden thud, muting the sound of the storm outside. The rain still hammered against the roof, but inside, there was a different kind of silence, one that felt contained, not empty. The air smelled of hay, dust, and old timber warmed by years of sun and labor. The woman stood just inside the barn, not moving further in. She kept a respectful distance, as if afraid that stepping too far might break whatever fragile permission. She had just been given water, dripped from her clothes onto the wooden floor, forming small dark patches beneath her feet. Daniel Mercer leaned back against a support beam near the entrance, arms still crossed. He didn't sit. He didn't relax. Years of solitude had made him someone who always stayed slightly on guard, even in his own space. He watched her carefully. Up close, she looked even more exhausted than he had first thought. Not just tired from travel or weather, but worn down. In a way that suggested she had been carrying weight for a long time without rest. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of him, but from the cold and exhaustion finally catching up. "You got a name?" he asked after a moment. That was a short pause before she answered. "Anna," she said softly. The name settled into the space between them without ceremony. Daniel nodded once. "All right, Anna." Another stretch of silence followed. The storm outside filled the gaps, wind pushing against wood, rain sliding down the roof in steady rhythm. The barn creaked occasionally, adjusting itself to the weather like an old living thing. Anna shifted slightly, unsure of where she was allowed to stand. Her eyes scanned the barn stall's tools, stacked hay, shadows in corners. She wasn't studying it with curiosity, but with calculation, survival instinct. She was figuring out what kind of place she had entered. Daniel noticed. "You've worked on a farm before?" he asked. "A little," she replied. "Not like this, but I can learn fast." "Everyone says that," he muttered without judgment. She didn't argue. Instead, she took a slow breath and spoke again. Her voice, quieter now, more careful. "I don't need special treatment," she said. "I know I don't belong here. I just needed a place where I wouldn't be sent away again." That sentence lingered longer than the others. Daniel looked at her differently for the first time, not as a stranger requesting shelter, but as someone carrying something heavier than rain-soaked clothes. People didn't usually say things like that unless they had been turned away more times than they could count. Still, trust didn't come easily to him. "You understand what this is?" he said firmly. "This isn't a stopover. You work. You earn your place. If you can't keep up, you leave." Anna nodded immediately. "I understand." No hesitation, no negotiation, just acceptance. That mattered. Daniel pushed off the beam and walked a few steps deeper into the barn. He grabbed an old blanket from a storage shelf and tossed it toward her. It wasn't new. It wasn't clean, but it was dry. She caught it carefully, as if it might disappear if handled too roughly. "Dry off," he said. "Then we'll talk about tomorrow." Anna clutched the blanket, hesitating for a second before wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth didn't erase the exhaustion, but it gave her enough comfort to lower her guard slightly. For the first time since arriving, she exhaled slowly. Daniel watched her quietly. There was still caution in his posture, but something had shifted. Not trust, he wasn't there yet, but acknowledgement. She wasn't just a problem to solve, or a risk to manage. She was a person standing in his barn, asking for a chance most people would never ask for in the first place. Outside, thunder rolled again, deeper this time. Anna flinched slightly at the sound, then steadied herself. "You can sleep in the corner stall tonight," Daniel said, pointing toward an empty section of the barn. "There's hay. It's not comfortable, but it's dry. So that's more than I had before," she replied quietly. Daniel didn't respond to that. He simply watched as she moved slowly toward the corner he had indicated. She walked carefully, still unsure of boundaries, still unsure if this permission was real or temporary. When she reached the stall, she stopped again. Then, unexpectedly, she turned back toward him. "Why?" she asked. The question wasn't loud. It wasn't demanding. It was genuine confusion. Daniel frowned slightly. "Why? Why? Let me stay," she said. "You don't know me?" That question hung in the air longer than expected. Daniel looked away briefly, toward the barn door, where rain blurred the world outside. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in thought. There was no simple answer. Not one he could explain quickly. Not one he even fully understood himself, because part of it was logic. A storm, an empty barn, a person who seemed willing to work, but another part, smaller, quieter, was something else. Something tied to absence, to silence, to the way loneliness made even cautious decisions feel heavier when faced with another human in need. He finally spoke, voice steady but softer than before. "Because turning you away doesn't make anything better for either of us." It wasn't kindness, it wasn't charity, it was honesty. Anna nodded slowly, accepting the answer, even if she didn't fully understand it. "Thank you," she said again. This time, the words didn't feel like formality. They felt like survival. Outside, the storm continued. Inside the barn, two strangers remained on opposite sides of the same space. One carrying grief, the other carrying exhaustion, both unaware that this moment was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. The storm had not stopped. By morning it lingered, like a heavy memory outside the barn, rain still falling in uneven bursts. Wind brushing across the fields in long, tired waves. The world looked washed out, gray sky, wet ground, and distant trees bending slightly as if they were still recovering from the night. Inside the barn, the air was cooler now. The warmth of earlier hours had faded, replaced by the steady chill that comes when a storm refuses to fully leave. Anna had not slept much. She sat in the corner stall Daniel had assigned her. wrapped in the rough blanket he had given her. Hay rustled softly beneath her as she shifted, trying to find a position that didn't ache. Every sound in the barn felt amplified in the quiet after the storm, the drip of water from beams, the occasional creak of wood settling, the soft movement of animals outside. She was careful not to move too much. Careful not to make noise. It was a habit she had learned from places where taking up space felt dangerous. Daniel was already awake. He moved through the barn with practiced rhythm, feed, adjusting gates, inspecting tools. He didn't rush, but there was purpose in everything he did. The farm demanded attention, even when the world outside was unsettled. He noticed her awake, but didn't speak immediately. That was his way. Time passed in silence until he finally set down a bucket near one of the stalls and looked in her direction. "You sleep at all?" he asked. Anna hesitated before answering honestly. "A little." Daniel nodded once, as if that was enough information. He didn't press further. He wasn't the kind of man who asked unnecessary questions, especially from someone still new to his land. Instead, he gestured slightly toward the bucket. "There's water and bread in the shed outside the barn. Eat when you're ready." Anna stood slowly, careful with her movements. Her body felt stiff from the cold and the night spent sitting upright. She took a moment before stepping out of the stall, unsure if she was supposed to wait for permission or act on what she had been told. Daniel didn't stop her. That, too, was an answer. She walked to the bucket, drank water cautiously, then nodded in quiet acknowledgement. It wasn't hunger that surprised her, it was the fact that she was allowed to meet it. Without being questioned, Daniel watched her briefly, then leaned against a post. "You said you can work?" he said. "Yes," Anna replied quickly. "Good, because there's a lot to do." The words weren't harsh. They were factual, the kind of truth the farm never hid. He pointed toward the far side of the barn. "Animals need feeding twice a day. Stalls need cleaning. Fence near the west field is damaged. Do you help fix it?" Anna listened carefully, nodding as each task was listed. She didn't pretend to understand everything, but she also didn't hesitate to accept it. "I can do that," she said. Daniel studied her again, this time longer, not in suspicion alone, but in assessment. He had seen people break under farm work before. It wasn't easy, even for those who had grown up with it. And yet, something about her didn't suggest fragility in the usual sense. It suggested endurance, the kind that came from having no other choice but to keep moving. Still, trust was not given quickly here. "You don't fall behind," he said firmly. "If you can't keep up, you tell me. Don't wait until things break." Anna nodded again. "I understand." A pause followed. Daniel pushed himself off the post and walked toward the barn door. The rain outside had slowed, but the sky remained heavy. The fields looked untouched, as if the storm had only paused rather than ended. He stopped at the doorway and looked back at her. "You can stay," he said finally. The words were simple, direct, final, but they carried weight. Anna froze slightly, as if she hadn't expected the decision to come so cleanly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel gave a short nod. "But listen carefully," he added. "This isn't charity, it's work. You earn your place here every day. I don't make exceptions." "I understand," she replied. There was no argument in her voice, only acceptance. Daniel stepped outside for a moment, letting the cool air hit him. The farm did not ease her in gently. From the very first full morning after the storm, Anna learned that life here moved with a strict, unchanging rhythm. The sun rose, whether she was ready or not. The animals needed feeding, whether she was tired or not. In the land, indifferent to human struggle, demanded attention without apology. Daniel Mercer did not hover over her. He did not offer comfort or repeated instructions. He showed her something once, expected effort, and moved on. It wasn't cruelty, it was the way he survived. On a farm like this, work had to be done correctly, or it had to be done again. Anna followed him through the morning tasks, trying to match his pace. The first job was simple, feeding the animals. She carried a bucket of feed through damp grass toward the chicken coop. The air still held traces of last night's storm-wet earth, fresh wind, and the distant smell of rain-soaked wood. Chickens scattered as she approached, unfamiliar with her presence. She hesitated at first, unsure how close she was allowed to get. Daniel's voice came from behind her. "Don't overthink it. They're not waiting for permission." She nodded and continued. Her movements were careful at first. Too careful. She spilled some feed, corrected herself, tried again. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Daniel didn't praise her. He simply observed and moved on to the next task. By midday, she was cleaning stalls. The work was harder than she expected, physical, repetitive, and unrelenting. Hay dust clung to her clothes, and her arms grew tired quickly from lifting and scraping. At one point, she paused, resting her hand on a wooden beam to steady herself. Daniel noticed but said nothing at first. Only after a few seconds did he speak. Keep moving. If you stop every time, it gets hard, you won't finish anything out here. It wasn't unkind. It was truth. So, she continued. Hours passed in steady motion, scooping, carrying, sweeping, lifting. The barn slowly shifted from disarray to order under their combined effort. Daniel worked ahead of her, setting examples rather than instructions. She followed, adjusting each time she made a mistake. By afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds. Light filtered into the barn, illuminating floating dust in the air. The storm was gone, but its aftermath still lingered in the mud outside. During a short break, Anna sat on an overturned wooden crate near the barn wall. Her hands were sore, her shoulders tight, but she didn't complain. She watched Daniel across the barn as he repaired a loose wooden latch on the stall door. He worked with quiet precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Anna hesitated before speaking. You've been doing this a long time, she said. Daniel didn't look up. Long enough? A pause. You always work alone? She asked carefully. That made him stop for a fraction of a second. Then he continued fixing the latch. Used to not be alone, he said simply. The answer wasn't explained further. It didn't need to be. Anna didn't press. She understood enough from the tone. Silence returned, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. Two people working in the same space, each carrying things they didn't fully speak about. Later that day, they moved to the west fence line. A section had been damaged by the storm, wood broken, posts loosened. Daniel handed her tools without much instruction and pointed toward the work. Hold it steady, he said. She did. At first, her grip slipped, and she had to adjust. Daniel corrected her once, then let her figure out the rest. Slowly, she began to understand the rhythm of it, the timing, the pressure, the patience required to repair something that nature had already tried to undo. By late afternoon, the fence stood stronger again. Anna stepped back slightly, wiping sweat from her forehead. She looked at the repaired section, surprised at how different it looked from when they started. I didn't think I could do that, she admitted quietly. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He tightened a final bolt, then finally said, You did it because you kept going. It wasn't praise, but it was recognition. As the sun lowered in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, they walked back toward the barn. The day had been long, but not wasted. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to be felt. Anna no longer walked as someone unsure if she belonged on the property. She walked as someone who had contributed to it. Daniel noticed that too. When they reached the barn, he paused at the doorway. Same again tomorrow, he said. She nodded. I'll be ready. He studied her briefly, then stepped inside. The barn doors closed behind them, and for the first time since she arrived, Anna didn't feel like she was simply being allowed to stay somewhere. She felt like she was beginning to exist within it. The farm settled into a quieter rhythm after the first few days. The initial tension between Daniel and Anna hadn't disappeared, but it had softened into something more functional. They spoke when needed, worked in sync when required, and otherwise allowed silence to do most of the talking. On a farm, silence wasn't empty, it was practical. But silence also has a way of holding things people don't say. One late afternoon, the sky was clear again. The storm had fully passed, leaving behind a washed, bright landscape. The fields looked almost renewed, as if the rain had cleaned more than just dust. Anna was near the barn entrance, folding hay into neat stacks. Her movements were steadier now than they had been on her first day. Not effortless, but controlled. She had learned the pace of the place. Daniel was inside the barn, repairing a harness. The sound of metal buckles and leather straps echoed softly as he worked. A quiet moment stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Anna spoke. Did you always live like this? Daniel paused, but didn't look up immediately. Like, what? He asked. Alone, she said simply. That made him stop for a second longer than usual. He tightened his strap, then replied, No, nothing more. Anna didn't push right away. She had learned that pushing too fast with Daniel often closed doors instead of opening them. But something about the question lingered in the air, unfinished. After a while, she spoke again. Softer this time. I didn't plan to end up here, she said. Daniel glanced toward her briefly, but stayed quiet. Anna continued, still focused on the hay. In her hands, I had a place before. Not a good one, but it was mine in a way. Then things changed, and I couldn't stay anymore. She stopped herself there, as if deciding how much of the story was safe to share. Daniel set the harness down slowly. He wasn't a man who interrupted easily, but he also wasn't blind to patterns. People didn't arrive on remote farms asking for barn shelter unless something had pushed them far beyond normal choices. You don't have to explain everything, he said after a moment. I know, Anna replied, but I think you already understand more than I say. That made him look at her properly. She wasn't accusing him, She wasn't trying to draw sympathy. It was observation. Quiet, careful observation. The kind that came from someone who had spent time reading situations. To survive them, Daniel leaned against a post, arms loosely at his sides. "You learn to read people out here," he said. "Helps you decide who stays and who doesn't." Anna nodded slightly. "I've learned the same thing," she said, "just in different places." A breeze moved through the barn, carrying the scent of dry hay and distant fields. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt less like distance now, and more like shared understanding of something unspoken. Daniel finally broke it. "You said you needed a place," he said. "But needing isn't the same as belonging." Anna looked at him. "True," she said quietly, "but sometimes needing is how it starts." That answer stayed with him longer than expected. Later that evening, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the farm, Daniel worked outside near the tool shed. Anna was nearby, organizing supplies without being asked. The day's labor was nearly done, but neither of them seemed eager to stop yet. At one point, Daniel paused again, this time not from work, but memory. He looked toward the open fields beyond the fence line. Anna noticed. "You lost someone," she said gently. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened slightly, a subtle reaction he didn't often show. After a long pause, he finally said, "Wife?" One word, heavy enough to explain everything and nothing at the same time. Anna didn't speak right away. She lowered her hands, letting the silence settle naturally instead of rushing to fill it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Daniel gave a small nod, not acceptance, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. A moment passed. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "It's been a long time." Anna looked at him carefully. "Doesn't always make it easier." That earned the smallest shift in his expression, something between agreement and recognition. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." For the first time since she arrived, the distance between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like two separate paths that had crossed at the edge of understanding. Anna went back to organizing supplies. Daniel returned to his work. But something had changed. Not openly, not dramatically, but enough that the barn no longer held. Just silence between them. It held shared weight. Two lives, shaped by loss, standing in the same space, learning carefully, slowly, that survival wasn't the only thing still possible. The days after their conversation didn't change the farm's routine, but they changed something quieter, something underneath it. Work still came first. Animals still needed feeding. Fences still needed checking. The land still demanded attention, without hesitation. But now, there was a slight difference in how Daniel and Anna moved around each other. Not closeness exactly, but less distance, in the silence. It was a late afternoon when it happened. The sky was clear, painted in soft orange light as the sun began to drop behind the far line of trees. The kind of sunset that made everything on the farm look slower, almost suspended in time. Long shadows stretched across the barnyard, and the air carried the calm that follows a long day of work. Daniel was outside near the barn, repairing a wheel on an old farm cart. The metal was stubborn, rusted in places, refusing to cooperate. Easily, he worked with steady patience, using tools that had clearly been used for years longer than they were. Meant to last. Anna approached without speaking at first. She had a small bucket in her hands, filled with tools she had just finished cleaning. She set it down nearby, then hesitated, watching him struggle slightly with the bolt. "You need more leverage?" she said after a moment. Daniel glanced at her briefly. "I've got it," he replied, but she didn't move away. Instead, she stepped closer, not intruding, but offering presence. She picked up a nearby wooden plank and positioned it carefully beside the wheel. "If you brace it here," she said, "it won't shift when you turn it." Daniel paused. He looked at the setup, then at her. For a moment, he said nothing. Finally, he adjusted the tool and tried again, using her suggestion. The bolt loosened more easily this time. He stopped working and exhaled slightly. "You've done this before," he said. "Not exactly," she replied. "But I've fixed things that didn't want to be fixed." That answer carried more meaning than she intended. Daniel studied her for a moment longer than usual. There was no pride in her voice, just experience. The kind earned, not taught. He tightened the last part of the wheel and stepped back. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The sunset light fell across the barnyard, turning dust in the air into soft glowing particles. It was Anna who broke the silence again. "It's quieter here than I expected," she said. Daniel gave a short, almost dry reply. "It's a farm." "That's not what I mean," she said. He looked at her, waiting. Anna hesitated slightly, searching for the right words. "I mean, it's quieter in a way that feels different, not empty, just honest." That made Daniel pause. Honest wasn't a word people often used to describe silence, but he understood what she meant. They stood there for a moment, both looking out across the fields. The wind moved gently through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out once before falling quiet again. Daniel finally spoke. After my wife passed, I thought I'd get used to it. The quiet. He didn't often speak about it, not because he was hiding it, but because there had never been anyone to say it to. Anna didn't interrupt. But it doesn't really go away, he continued. It just becomes part of everything. Anna nodded slowly. I think some things don't leave. They just stop being loud. A sentence stayed in the air longer than expected. Daniel looked down at his hands, still rough from work, still marked by years of repetition and loss. Then he glanced toward the house in the distance, the one he rarely thought of as anything other than structure now. For a moment, the past didn't feel far away. It felt nearby, just quiet. Anna stepped closer to the cart and rested her hand lightly on it. You built all this? She asked, changing the subject gently. Most of it, Daniel said. That's a lot for one person? A faint, almost invisible hint of something like a tired smile appeared on his face. It had to be done, he said simply. Another pause. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky deeper, shades of orange and soft purple. The farm looked different in that light, less like a workplace, more like a place paused between moments. Anna turned slightly toward him. I don't think I would have lasted out here alone, she admitted. Dan, you didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, he said, you're not alone here. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic, but it was the first time he had said anything like that. Anna looked at him, surprised not by the words themselves, but by the fact that he meant them enough to say them at all. She nodded once. Then I'll keep working, she said. Daniel gave a small nod in return, and for the first time since she arrived, the space between them didn't feel like survival or obligation. It felt like something beginning to form quietly, without permission, shaped not by words, but by presence, trust, and the slow breaking of walls. Neither of them had realized they were carrion. Autumn arrived quietly on the farm, as if it had always been there and simply decided to be noticed again. The fields shifted into softer tones, gold amber, and deep brown. The air grew sharper in the mornings, carrying the scent of wood smoke from distant farms. The barn, once just a shelter for animals and storage, now felt like a place that had learned to hold more than work. It held routine, familiarity, and something close to companionship. Anna had been there for months now. She no longer moved like someone uncertain of where she was allowed to stand. Her steps were steady, familiar with the rhythm of the land. She knew the feeding schedule without being reminded. She could repair small things on her own, now tools, fences, simple structures that once would have overwhelmed her. But more than skill, something else had changed. She stayed, not because she had nowhere else left to go, but because she had stopped feeling like she didn't belong. Daniel noticed it in small ways. The way she tied back her hair before work, without hesitation. The way she spoke, less cautiously and more naturally. The way she no longer flinched at the silence between them, because it no longer felt like distance. And Daniel himself had changed too, though he would never say it out loud. The house was no longer as empty as it once felt. The silence wasn't gone, but it wasn't as heavy. He had learned to share space with another presence moving through the farm. One morning, Daniel stepped outside early, as he always did. Mist still hovered low over the fields, softening the edges of everything it touched. The barn door was already open. Anna was there, feeding the animals. She turned when she heard him approach. Morning, she said simply. Morning, he replied. No formality, no hesitation, just routine. He leaned against the fence for a moment, watching her work. The animals responded to her now without hesitation. Even the stubborn ones had learned her presence meant consistency. You've gotten good at this, he said after a while. Anna gave a faint, almost amused look. I had a good teacher, she replied. Daniel didn't respond immediately, but the corner of his mouth shifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough that it carried meaning. They worked side by side for a while in comfortable silence, the kind that no longer needed to be filled, the kind that comes only after enough time has been shared without expectation. Later that day, they repaired the barn roof together. It wasn't urgent work, just maintenance before winter came fully. Daniel handed her tools without explanation now. She didn't ask unnecessary questions anymore. They moved in rhythm, passing materials, holding ladders, fixing what time and weather had worn down. At one point, Anna paused at the top of the ladder, looking out across the farm. It's strange, she said. What is? Daniel asked from below, not feeling like I'm just passing through anymore. Daniel looked up at her for a moment. He didn't rush his answer. That's because you're not, he said simply. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't emotional. But they were steady, certain in a way Daniel rarely allowed himself to be. Anna stayed quiet for a moment, taking that in. Then she nodded. Good, she said softly. As the afternoon faded, they finished the roof and climbed down. The sky had begun to shift again, this time into calm evening colors. The farm looked peaceful in a way that felt earned, not accidental. They walked back toward the house together, tools carried between them. Halfway there, Daniel slowed slightly. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Anna didn't answer immediately. She considered it honestly, not defensively. "Not like before," she said finally. "At first, I just needed somewhere to stop running." "And?" Lee asked. She looked toward the barn, then the fields beyond. "Now, I think I've already found it." Daniel nodded slowly. No surprise, no resistance, just understanding. When they reached the porch, Anna set the tools down carefully. She didn't rush inside. Neither of them did. The evening air was cool, quiet, steady. Daniel looked out across the land. He had once believed he would spend the rest of his life alone. Minnie spoke, almost as if deciding something that had already been decided long ago. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours too. Stay in, too. If you want it." Anna looked at him. This time, there was no hesitation in her response. "I already am staying," she said. A pause. Then Daniel gave a small nod. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." They stood there for a moment longer, side by side, looking out over the farm as the last light of day settled across it. No declarations, no grand endings. Just two people who had arrived at the same place from different kinds of emptiness, found, without planning it, that what began as survival had slowly become something much closer to home.